Entrance. The doctor, who was in his 50s, gestured to the computer screen and said, "This is the most suitable candidate. He is 21 years old. The last time he visited the hospital was 5 months ago for routine controls. All of his medical data matches with him," and continued. "I did a little research on him before I let you know. He lives in Istanbul. Undergrad. His father is a wealthy man. He lost his mother to cancer 2 years ago. I don't think we can find anything better." The young woman said, "Good. There's no time for that anyway," and asked, "Do you think it's going to work?" Before answering the question of the woman standing next to him, the man took another look at the piece of paper lying on the table to make sure that he had taken all the necessary notes. After giving the necessary commands to turn off the computer, he turned to the young woman and said, "If you are asking from a medical point of view, yes. This kid will do the trick. Of course it doesn't finish there. As you know, your skills will come into play here. But as far as I know you, you're going to get this done," and he blinked. "How much time do I have on that part of the job? As we talked about before, it's a maximum of 6 months. Anything more than that would make it harder." The woman did not respond. After the doctor made sure that the computer was turned off and they hadn't forgotten anything around, he said, "Let's get out of here as soon as possible." They quietly left the room. Chapter 1. Having completed its short voyage of 200 meters, the boat has finally reached its destination. It docked on the shore so that its 2 passengers could safely disembark and anchored. It was 8 o'clock in the evening. It was late December. The weather was windy and cold and the sea was turbulent. This extremely short sea voyage was enough to turn the stomachs of those who were not used to it upside down. As the captain of the boat showed his 2 passengers the way to land, it crossed his mind that these people, who preferred the luxurious restaurant in the Maiden's Tower for dinner, were extremely wealthy. The Maiden's Tower, one of the symbolic structures of Istanbul, was thought to have been built by the Athenian general Alcibiades in the 5th century BC to control Persian ships. The tower was used as a lighthouse during the Byzantine period. The tower, which was used for military purposes during the Ottoman period, has been added since the 18th century. Over time, the tower, which has experienced unfortunate events such as fire and earthquake, has been repaired and renovated several times. The restaurant, on the other hand, started its operations in the year 2000 following the second restoration process carried out in 1995 to 1999. Since its opening, it has started to serve local and foreign visitors and has become one of the most important tourist attractions in Istanbul. The captain was right about his 2 passengers, one an elderly man and the other a lovely woman in her early 40s. 57-year-old Mehmet Demirsoy was the owner of Demirsoy Nakliyat, one of Istanbul's well-paid shipping companies. His second wife, Elif Yilmaz, whom he married 2 years ago today, on December 22, 2020, was a nurse and only 44 years old. "That is it, sir." Mehmet Demirsoy smiled gracefully and said, "Thank you." After disembarking from the boat, the man hugged his young wife, who seemed slightly shaken, in an affectionate manner and asked if she was okay. The young woman placed a kiss on her husband's cheek. "I don't have anything, don't worry, I'm just a little nauseous." A few seconds later, a small swarthy man in uniform in his 30s appeared in front of the couple. With a smile that was clearly forced, he said, "Welcome, sir, let's take you like this." "Please," he said, escorting the couple to the entrance of the luxury restaurant, as if they couldn't find it themselves. When they entered the bright and elegant restaurant, another young attendant who did not like his job as much as his friend outside, took the couple's coats and attempted to show them their table, but without complete success. Instead, the job was taken over by a group of 4 friends, who the Demirsoy couple apparently had been waiting inside for a while. "Look over there, who's coming? So the double doves have finally arrived. Hello everyone. I'm sorry honey, we're a little late, as you know, Istanbul traffic. Come on. Today is your day. Besides, we have just arrived too," said İPUCU, and as she kissed her friend, she thought that Istanbul traffic was the most cliché excuse of all time. İPUCU, or İpek Gürel as she was known at that time, was Elif Yilmaz's friend from university. She and Burak Sahin got married 5 years ago. Elif Yilmaz and Burak Sahin smiled and shook hands. "Welcome Elif, how are you? Is it good, Burak, you?" The remaining 2 members of the group were Ismail and Zeynep Çetin, old friends of Mehmet Demirsoy. Ismail Çetin was an experienced lawyer who was preparing himself for retirement. Zeynep Çetin was a kindergarten teacher who had not worked for the past few years. Ismail Çetin hugged his friend and said, "How are you, my friend? I've seen you very well. Elif has rejuvenated you." Mehmet Demirsoy said, "I couldn't be better, Ismail. What is it, are you jealous or not? But you're like a lad." The welcome chapter came to an end when Zeynep Çetin, a modest and shy woman, welcomed the newcomers with her thin and weak voice. The waiter, with a bald head and a big nose, tall and slightly hunched, came to take orders. Mehmet Demirsoy compared the waiter to a vulture and could hardly contain himself from laughing. Along with appetizers and snacks, when white wine and raki came to the table, the conversation of the group of 6 began to thicken. The conversation resumed after İpek Şahin, who was understood to be sensitive about wines, gently scolded the waiter who accidentally brought Borgo Sanlio instead of Maryvale Starmont. After adjusting the waiter, İpek Şahin turned to the group and continued her speech eagerly. When I was in college, I liked physiology classes the most. The neurophysiology lectures were interesting. I would have liked to have been a neurologist or a psychiatrist, but unfortunately I wasn't that smart. Elif Yilmaz said. As a matter of fact, what İpek was interested in was not the physiology lesson, but the teacher who gave the course. A professor named Dr. Ünal Aydın was coming to the class. But İpek was not wrong. Mr. Ünal was really a very handsome man. Triple A. That's right. The man was good-looking. There was no girl in the class who didn't like him. But I still liked the class, not the teacher. It was clear that Zeynep Çetin did not like this kind of conversation, even though she tried to pretend to be having fun. Burak Şahin, who was still a young man, was certainly not the men his wife likes as his favorite subject. Noticing the situation, İpek Şahin kissed her husband exaggeratedly, saying, "But now I am married to the most handsome man in the world." Elif Yilmaz also laid her head on her husband's shoulder. At the same time, the bald-headed waitress came to the table, like the ads on TV that went wrong on live broadcasts at the right time. He served main dishes consisting of seafood. What is Boris doing? Is he in a good mood? He is fine. It's been more than 2 years since he finished school. But he hasn't had a job for a year. He's almost 25 and he's just walking around with his father's money. Boris Demirsoy was the son of Mehmet Demirsoy. Let him live out a little of his youth. Young people have a hard job. It's a mess. It's not like in our time. He knows what he's doing. As long as he's in good health. Well, that's just the way it is. Something to do, God willing. We're waiting. The gathering of family friends continued for 3 hours. Sometimes the subject shifted to the economy, sometimes to football, sometimes to politics. Shopping, memories of youth, music, cinema were mentioned. İsmail Çetin gave a boring lecture about the history of the Maiden's Tower. There were also small shoving of words. It was an ordinary, pleasant night of celebration. It was nearly 1 o'clock when the 6 friends decided to get up to return home. After the group went to Üsküdar with the boat waiting for them, they said goodbye to each other by saying that they had a very pleasant evening and that they should see each other more often. After walking 200 meters, Mehmet Demirsoy took out the key to his Audi A8 car, put it in the right pocket of his jacket, and raised his hand slightly and pressed the button on the key. A sound was heard from the vehicle about 10 meters away, which meant that its doors were opened. A journey of about 15 kilometers awaited the Demirsoy couple from Üsküdar to Mehmet Demirsoy's spacious apartment on Beşiktaş Bayakdere Street. Just before getting into the car, Elif Yilmaz Demirsoy made a strange hand gesture that emphasized that her husband was drunk by bringing her index finger closer to her mouth and said, "Will you be able to use it, my dear? If you want, let's call a taxi." "No problem, I just had a drink." The woman, who was as sure as her name that her husband had drunk 2 glasses and was halfway through the third, said, "As you wish, honey," and then got into the vehicle. Mehmet Demirsoy started the vehicle. He turned on his smartphone. His goal was to look at Google Maps to see the appropriate route. As he looked at the phone screen, his eye caught the SMS sent to him a few minutes ago. The text message was sent by a number that was not registered in Demirsoy's directory. Curious, he opened it. "Hello, Mr. Mehmet. I'm İpek, Elif's friend. Please don't let her know that you've received this message. Be careful with Elif. You may be in danger." Noticing that her husband was late in moving the car, Elif Yilmaz Demirsoy asked, "What's the matter, my love? Is there a problem?" No, nothing. This is the usual unnecessary notification of the banks," he said. He would decide later what to do about İpek Şahin's message. Nini, 8, Savine, 6, Vivi, Four, 3, Winnie. In recent years, the Toxic Melody nightclub in Ortaköy has been becoming a venue that attracts more and more customers, despite the pandemic and many subsequent problems. On December 31, 2022, when the clock struck midnight, the crowd, mostly consisting of young people, gathered in the middle of the venue specially prepared for New Year's Eve, accompanied by cocktails or beers in their hands, screaming and singing with meaningless happiness as if the new year they would enter would add good things to their lives. After the welcome cry of 2023 was over, a group of 4 people performing live music took the stage. The vocalist of the band, whose stage name was Mia, whose real name was AJ, was a red-haired and white-skinned girl. The guitarist and drummer were men. While the band performed their ridiculous repertoire consisting of Tarkan Simarik, Ada Pekin's Dirt Ben Durman Bend, More Votc's Burdur Dim Var, Metallica's Sad But True, REM's Losing My Religion and Kenan Doğulu's Vay, Mehmet Demirsoy's son Baris hugged his girlfriend Melek, who was sitting next to him, and enjoyed the night in the company of his close friends Mert and Senaz. The comfortable sofa on which the young people sat was covered with purple upholstery to match the lighting of the space. Baris Demirsoy took another sip of his beer. Looking disdainfully at the crowd of people kicking around the platform to the accompaniment of music, he said, "Look at these retards, how they tear themselves apart," and pulled Melek Gunner towards him and kissed her as if he had said important things. Mert Sanmez, who was sitting across from him, said, "Exactly, buddy. Are you going to go on vacation somewhere this year, Baris?" asked Senaz as she rolled the words around, as if the noise in the environment didn't make it difficult enough to understand what was being said. "Let's see, we haven't talked yet, but maybe we'll run away to our father's house in Palandokan," said Baris Demirsoy, looking at Melek Gunner, whom he hugged as if they were going to grab her, and without making eye contact with Senaz. An unexpected noise at the same time interrupted the conversation of the young people. A series of gunshots sparked. With the loud music playing for hours and the drinks being consumed, the crowd in the venue could not fully comprehend where the sound was coming from at first. Did the explosions come from inside the nightclub or from outside? Was it fireworks? Was it something special organized by the club because of New Year's Eve? At best it was fireworks. Within seconds, it became clear beyond dispute that the sounds of explosions were not a planned part of the demonstration. Right in front of the entrance door of the venue, someone had either injured someone, killed them, or at least tried to do so. The live music stopped first. Then the screams of multiple women in quick succession made things groan. Then it was a mess. "Call an ambulance. The man is bleeding all over. You come in, don't interfere. Take it here, hold your head, slow. Be careful, he's got a knife. Is there a doctor here?" I said doctor. Shouts and screams began to spread from outside the nightclub to the inside. As the bartenders called an ambulance, several men at the door got into each other. It was not immediately clear why the fight broke out or whether anyone was killed or seriously injured. There was only one thing that was certain for Baris Demirsoy: the New Year's Eve party had ended early. 20 minutes later, when ambulance and police sirens sounded in the distance, things had partially calmed down. Baris turned to Mert and said, "Let's go on, buddy." Mert nodded. The girls did not object to this either. They both hurried out, holding their girlfriends' hands tightly. Baris Demirsoy started his red-black Ducati motorcycle. He quickly placed his helmet on his head. Melek settled behind Baris. As Mert and Senaz ran towards the metallic gray Ford Focus that Mert had borrowed from his brother for that night, he simply told his friend, "We'll get in touch later." The 2 men who had been waiting patiently in the black Hyundai, which had been parked 50 yards away from the poisonous melody for the past 5 hours, were also extremely disturbed by the fight that had just broken out, albeit for different reasons than the young people who were having fun inside. They could have lost sight of their goals because of the confusion. "That's him? Are you sure?" "Yes, shut up and drive that car." "Who's the girl behind him?" "Probably his girlfriend, I don't know." "We can't do it when she's on the motorbike, can we?" "No, we won't. We'll wait for her to leave." "I can't call him now." "No, he's fine, but he needs to rest. When you wake up, I'll pass you on." "Okay, he looks at your emails." "Okay, Mr. Yusuf, don't worry. Thank you and Happy New Year to you too. Goodbye." Elif Yilmaz Demirsoy hung up the phone. She put it on the coffee table in the living room. She headed to the kitchen to help Ms. Nasi. Before she could get to the kitchen, she heard the bedroom door open. "Elif, have you seen my phone?" "Oh, did you get up, my dear? How did you be?" "I have your phone. I took it with me so that no one would disturb me." "I'm better." "Were you talking to someone?" "Yes, Mr. Yusuf called from his workplace. I think there was a delay in one of the deliveries to Greece and the Greek customer representative called. Or something like that." I said Mehmet is sleeping. "He sent you an email and told him to take a look at you." Okay, we'll see. The same thing happens all the time. But impatient men can't wait a day." "Has Mrs. Nasi finished the preparations?" "I was just going to look at him, my dear." "I guess she made it easier." Mehmet Demirsoy looked at his watch. It was 6 o'clock in the afternoon. "Did Ali call?" "No, I'll let them know if they call, don't worry. You rest, my dear, we will sit late tonight as you know." Mehmet Demirsoy nodded to his wife and returned to his bedroom. He turned on his laptop before lying down on his bed. He looked at his emails, grumbling inwardly. He wrote something in response and turned off the computer, putting it aside. He lay down on his bed, hoping to take a nap a little longer. He couldn't sleep. Ever since the anniversary dinner, İPek Şahin's message had been gnawing at her brain. As if that wasn't enough, he had been struggling with an unknown flu-like illness for a week. Whatever the hell the disease was, there was nothing to be afraid of, but although he was normally a strong man, he could not come to his senses. Be careful with Elif. You may be in danger. Mehmet Demirsoy was a businessman for years and had received messages that threatened his life when necessary. But none of them made him as uneasy as İPek Şahin's writings. And he knew why. In his head, he involuntarily wandered back to when he first met Elif. It was at a time when he felt the deep emptiness of losing his wife most acutely. He had gone out on the coastal road to distract himself in his car and was wandering around alone, when suddenly his head turned and his eyes darkened. Then he found himself at the nearest health institution, Sisley Research Hospital. The beautiful nurse who took his blood pressure in the emergency room was more caring and compassionate than he had ever expected. This attitude touched something deep inside the businessman. This medical intervention in the emergency room turned into a romantic relationship so quickly that Mehmet Demirsoy still could not understand how. But something was wrong. In real life, things didn't work the way they did in romantic movies. If something sounds too beautiful to be true, it probably is not. But at that time, Mehmet Demirsoy deliberately chose to deceive himself. He could not find the strength to move away from this young and beautiful woman who had entered his life at lightning speed unless he saw a concrete mistake in her. Until now, Elif had not made such a mistake. However, after their relationship progressed and they decided to marry, the light that had existed in the young woman's eyes at first faded. Her gaze had become dull and her demeanor contrived. Mehmet Demirsoy, a wealthy man, suspected Elif at the time that she was after money. For the next 2 years, however, there was nothing to suggest that the young woman had such a problem. Elif was not keen on luxury or ostentation. She wasn't lazy either. Shortly after their marriage, when Mehmet Demirsoy told her that she could quit her job at the hospital if she wanted to gauge her reaction, Elif stated that she loved her job and would continue to work. The woman was not after money. On the surface, everything was perfect. But deep down, Mehmet Demirsoy knew. Their marriage was a lie. Apparently there were others who were aware of this fact. Maybe it's all just my imagination. Mehmet Demirsoy finally fell asleep. But he had a terrible dream. In his dream, his son Boris was tragically dying in a motorcycle accident. He woke up panting. He looked at his watch. He had slept a little more than an hour. At the same moment he heard a knock on the door. Boris Demirsoy pulled his motorcycle in front of one of the old apartment buildings built on a dark and narrow street with steep slopes. He began to kiss Melek. The young girl giggled as she gently nudged the young man who couldn't pick up his speed. "Enough, you're going to strangle me?" Boris Demirsoy winked. "Shall I come upstairs?" "Don't be ridiculous, ours are at home." "I'm cold, I go inside." "Come on, don't be late." "So be it." Melek Gunner lived in the Akaretler row houses neighborhood, which is located on the upper sides of Yıldız Technical University and is known for its steep slopes and narrow streets. Along the street where Melek lived with her family, the old houses, some of which were wooden, reflected the historical texture of Istanbul with the vines on them and the pots placed outside the windows. A large number of stray cats also added a mystical atmosphere to the historical texture of Istanbul and completed the characteristic structure. The young man followed his girlfriend through the door of the old apartment building until she was out of sight. Then, putting his helmet over his head, he jumped on his bike. With the effect of the cold air, he moved down the steep slope, leaving behind the thick layer of smoke that formed behind him. He didn't know he was being followed. And the last time he rode his motorcycle, Elif Yilmaz Demirsoy opened the door. Those who came were Mehmet Demirsoy's brother Ali Demirsoy, who was 4 years younger than him, and his wife Nurcan Demirsoy. The landlady pretended to be delighted to see the guests. "Welcome Nurcan, welcome Ali. Where were you? We were waiting earlier." Nurcan Demirsoy, while hugging Elif in an exaggerated way, said, "By God, we would have come earlier, my dear, but Istanbul traffic is at work. And when it's New Year's Eve, I miss you." Too many people were exploiting Istanbul traffic. As Ali Demirsoy handed his coat to Elif, he asked, "Where is our old man?" Elif Yilmaz, while gesturing to her guests to pass into the hall with her hand, said, "He had a little cold, but he was taking a nap. I'll let you know now." "He's heard of it already?" "Okay." There are also delicious smells coming from inside. "It is clear that Ms. Nacy has poured it again," Ali Demirsoy replied in his sonorous voice. And he followed his wife into the spacious hall of his brother's opulent house. Elif Yilmaz stayed behind the tiny Nurkan Demirsoy, who was physically the antithesis of her husband, and said, "I am coming to call Mehmet, you make yourself comfortable," and headed to the other side of the corridor. Ali and Nurkan went inside. Ali Demirsoy glanced with appetite at the amount and variety of food that the four people on the oversized table drawn towards the middle of the hall could never finish, and dipped his hand and put a shrimp in his mouth. Nurkan, who was seated in one of the seats on the right side of the table, looked at her husband with a sour face and motioned for him to move away from the table and sit next to him. Ali Demirsoy devoured the first shrimp, and after taking the second shrimp in his hand, he did as his wife said. Nurkan Demirsoy said in a low voice and without taking her eyes off the entrance of the hall, "I don't like this cocky woman at all. What did your brother find in that? Look at it, it's just for show." While she was waiting for her husband to say something to approve her, she noticed Ms. Nacy enter the hall. Nurkan was not sure if she had heard what she was saying and she smiled at her, pretending to be talking about atomic physics. Mrs. Nacy was wearing her coat and was obviously going to ask Elif Yilmaz, who she guessed was in the living room, for permission to go home. Ms. Nacy said in a weak voice and formal tone, "Welcome." Ali Demirsoy asked, "Hello Mrs. Nacy, how are you?" And without giving the woman a chance to say "I'm fine," he said, "The food looks great." The woman mumbled something vaguely in response and disappeared. A minute later, Elif Yilmaz Demirsoy returned with Mehmet Demirsoy. After the routine welcome ceremony, where everyone missed each other very much, saw each other very well and loved each other very much, the Demirsoy family went to the magnificent dinner table. "I think you have a little cold. How are you now?" Mehmet Demirsoy brushed off his brother's question. "I'm fine, nothing serious." Ali Demirsoy, who knows his brother well, interpreted this answer as if there is anything, "I can't talk about it right now, I will tell you when we are alone." Nurkan Demirsoy said, "What a resourceful woman this Mrs. Nacy. I wonder if she will give me the recipes for these dishes?" Wondering about the fate of the comments she had made about Elif 15 minutes earlier. "She really is, but she just went out. I'll ask her tomorrow." Nurkan Demirsoy smiled as she put her hand behind her ear, the wig that had fallen on her forehead. "Where is Baris?" interjected Ali Demirsoy. Mehmet Demirsoy remembered the bad dream he had just had. A distress filled him. Seeing that her husband did not answer the question, Elif said, "He went out with his friends in the afternoon. They booked a place for the evening at a venue that plays live music." Nurkan Demirsoy in her weak voice said, "Of course they should have fun. They're young. I wish he wouldn't ride that motorcycle," Mehmet Demirsoy said, staring into the void. He seemed to be talking more to himself than to the people in the room. No one answered this. An hour later, everyone was full and left the table. Mehmet Demirsoy said, "Why would you make me and Ali a coffee with a little sugar? Let's get some air on the balcony and hang out with Nurkan." "All right, dear. But take something on yourself. Don't stay long." 5 minutes later, Mehmet Demirsoy and his brother were sipping coffee on the large balcony with a pleasant view. Ali Demirsoy didn't beat around the bush. "What's the matter, old man? You're obviously bored with something." Mehmet Demirsoy took a deep breath. He left his coffee on the table. He looked at the balcony door, trying not to show it. There was no one coming. 10 days ago, Elif and I went to this famous restaurant in the Maiden's Tower for the wedding anniversary celebration. Yes. That night we were accompanied by old Ismail and his wife. A friend of Elif's from university was with us with her husband. The girl's name is İPUCU. So what? Here's what's happening. Mehmet Demirsoy took another sip of his coffee, which was about to run out, before continuing his words. Then his eye caught sight of the scenery in front of him. In this busy neighborhood of Istanbul, the flashing lights of vehicle headlights and street lamps mingled in the darkness of the night. The illuminated silhouettes of the skyscrapers in Levent and Maslak were vaguely visible. The green area somewhere on the left was hardly visible in the dark. Demirsoy turned his pensive gaze to his brother and continued his speech from where he left off. "We hung out at the venue until late. After we got in the car to go home, I received a message on my phone. It was Elif's friend İPUCU who sent the message." Mehmet Demirsoy paused. He looked at his brother. Ali Demirsoy made a hand sign in the sense of what was written in the message. Mehmet Demirsoy continued from where he left off. "She wrote that I was in danger and that I should be careful with Elif." There was a silence that lasted a few seconds. "Why did she say that? Did you ask her what exactly she meant?" "I asked her about it. She didn't respond." As if that was the point, Ali Demirsoy was able to say, Where did the woman get your phone number? At the same time, Elif Yilmaz Demirsoy appeared at the door of the balcony. On his red and black Ducati, Boris Demirsoy drove past wooden houses, most of which have preserved traditional Istanbul architecture, albeit restored. His goal was primarily to reach Sirigan Street. This street was one of the important transportation networks in the region stretching between Besiktas and Ortaköy. The streets were plunged into silence. The sound of the motorcycle broke through the silence of the night as the young rider tried to concentrate on the road. Then, suddenly he noticed the vehicle approaching from behind. The vehicle was approaching at an eerie speed. The young man instinctively sensed that something was not right. The black Hyundai's intentions were not good. Boris Demirsoy tried to increase the speed of his motorcycle, but narrow streets and sharp curves limited him. The car was locked on its target. The young man's heart began to beat rapidly. He gasped. He tried to fight, but there was no escape. "My dear, you're going to have cold, you're ill. Won't you go in yet? Besides, it's half an hour before midnight. Are you going to ring in the new year without us here?" Mehmet Demirsoy looked at his wife, who was standing at the door of the balcony, and said, "You are right, my dear, we are coming right away. We are engrossed in conversation. As you know, we haven't seen Ali for a long time." Elif went inside. Ali Demirsoy muttered to his brother, "We'll talk later." Mehmet Demirsoy nodded. Soon, the group of four, trying to appear as sincere and energetic as they could, entered the new year with drinks in their hands and kissed each other with exaggerated expressions, wishing each other well. The combined effort of the sounds of fireworks coming from somewhere outside and the celebration programs broadcast on the big screen television in the large hall helped to suppress the hidden negative energy in the Demirsoy's home. Ali Demirsoy and Nurkan Demirsoy left to return home around 1 o'clock. When Mehmet Demirsoy laid his head on the pillow again in the morning, the bad feeling inside him increased even more. The driver of the black Hyundai grinned mischievously. He had his prey in the palm of his hand. There was no one around to witness the incident. The young man had fought well so far. But it was obvious that his power had been cut off. The killer behind the wheel of the Hyundai stepped on the gas for the last time. The red and black Ducati flipped in the air and threw its rider over it. Boris Demirsoy flew and hit his head the electricity pole on the side of the street. The driver of the Hyundai coolly pulled the vehicle over. He got out of the vehicle and started walking towards the young man, who was lying motionless on the ground 10 meters away. So did his friend, who was sitting in the front right seat. They weren't done yet. Mehmet Demirsoy put a painkiller in his mouth and swallowed it with half a glass of water. Then he prepared himself a low-sugar Turkish coffee in the reddish coffee machine they had bought the previous month. As he poured his coffee into the cup, he remembered the coffee his first wife had once cooked in a coffee pot. Mehmet Demirsoy had been aching in the head since he woke up at 11 o'clock. It was now 2 o'clock in the afternoon and nothing had changed. He was home alone. Half an hour after he woke up, he noticed a message his wife had sent on the phone. "I'm going shopping, my dear. I didn't wake you up so you could rest." He went to the hall. He sat down in the chair in front of the TV. He put his feet up on the coffee table in front of him. He took a sip of his coffee. He picked up the remote and turned on the TV. After browsing a few channels, he caught his eye on a replay of one of the game shows that aired the previous week. He watched the game show until he finished his coffee. Then he thought of looking for Boris. Although Boris sometimes spent the night outside, he had been a son who had at least taken the trouble to let him know where he was staying and when he would return home. It was a little odd that he didn't call after leaving in the afternoon the day before. Mehmet Demirsoy called his son. No one responded. He put his phone aside. He forced himself to refocus on the nonsensical game show on TV, but it was clear that he couldn't do it. As if the poor quality of the program was not enough, advertisements kept entering. His mind was on his son as he headed to the bathroom to shower and shave. When Mehmet Demirsoy went under the hot water, the television he left open in the living room was talking about the traffic accident of a young man on a motorcycle, whose identity has not yet been identified. İPUCU Sahin ran out of the house as usual. She got into her white 2018 Toyota Corolla. She threw her handbag into the back seat. She first looked at herself in the front rearview mirror, then checked to see if she could easily see the rear of the car. She looked at his watch once more before starting the car. "I'll be late again." She had been married to Burak Sahin for 5 years and was happy with it in many ways. She loved her husband. She also lived in a house she couldn't imagine buying alone, and she rode in a car that wasn't bad at all. She had only one problem, if she could call it a problem. Every day she had to get up early in the morning to get to work and travel for at least an hour. It was 10 minutes past 7 when the white Corolla moved, leaving the modest duplex villa behind. İPek Şahin would first descend from her home in Kamlika towards the Anatolian side of the Bosphorus Strait and reach Kasikli Street, then go to Üsküdar, arrive at Üsküdar Pier Square and then go to Acıbadem Altanizade Hospital, where she has been working as a nurse for the last 8 years. If she was really lucky, she could reach the hospital in 45 minutes. After covering the first few kilometers of straight and wide road as fast as she could, the young woman turned to the right and entered the narrow and winding road that leads down to the Bosphorus from the outskirts of Kamlika. Apparently she was lucky. There was no traffic. Confident in her skill in driving, İPek Şahin slightly increased her speed. A few minutes later, she noticed strange noises coming from the car's right front wheel. Immediately afterwards, the vehicle began to shake, first slightly and then more violently. İPek Şahin slammed on the brakes, trying to control the vehicle. The brakes were discharged. Continuing to descend the narrow street at speed, the vehicle failed to take the first bend, which turned sharply to the left. She swerved to the right and did 3 somersaults. "Good afternoon, I'm calling from Sisli Research Hospital. My name is Salim. Am I talking with Mehmet Demirsoy? Sisli Research Hospital? The hospital where Elif works." It was already dark when Elif Yilmaz returned home with a shopping bag in her hand. She found Mehmet Demirsoy in the kitchen warming up leftovers from New Year's Eve. "My dear, I'm here," she exclaimed. She was strangely cheerful. She went to the kitchen and kissed her husband on the cheek. "You're hungry, aren't you, my love? I'm sorry I was going to be back sooner, but you know me, I got carried away when I went shopping." Mehmet Demirsoy looked indifferently at the bag she had put in his eye, as if trying to prove that she was shopping, and muttered, "It's okay." Elif Yilmaz said, "You rest late, my love, I'll change my clothes, I'll come right away, I'll prepare the meals," pointing to the stylish, attractive but not comfortable red blouse and dark tight blouse she was wearing. 15 minutes later, they sat down to dinner at the table in the living room. "What's wrong with you, my dear? You're a little stagnant. Are you upset with me or because I'm late?" Mehmet Demirsoy looked at his wife. How attractive Elif Yilmaz looked even after removing the makeup from her face and putting on her modest loungewear. But that familiar disturbing instinct haunts the businessman. When he was alone with his wife, he seemed to be looking at the world from somewhere outside his body, not through his own eyes. That sentiment had only grown stronger since he received the message. "What am I doing here with this woman? Love, dear, what does it have to do with it? I haven't recovered yet. In addition, I couldn't reach Boris. I called him twice and he didn't pick up today. Leave him alone, my love. He's young, let him travel and have some fun. If you go over it, he won't call at all. Besides, you're wearing yourself out for nothing." "I think you're right. Mine is a bad habit. Will you pass me the salt, dear?" Elif Yilmaz said, "Take it. If you want, I'll give you a massage after dinner," and she winked. Apparently, the woman was thinking about more than just giving a massage. And that wasn't a bad idea at all. "I brewed your tea, my love, as you like." It was a few minutes past 7 in the morning when Elif Yilmaz handed her husband the freshly brewed tea she had placed in an oversized porcelain cup. The two had almost finished their breakfast and would leave the house after a cup of tea. The New Year's holiday was over and a busy week awaited Mehmet Demirsoy. The same was true for Elif Yilmaz. "Thank you, my dear, you are the one. Mrs. Nacy has the key, doesn't she?" "Yes, dear, don't worry, she'll be here an hour after we leave." Mehmet Demirsoy nodded to his wife as he took another sip of his tea. The tea tasted great. Taking another big sip a few seconds later, the businessman said, "Come on, dear, let's get out if you're ready. We're going to be late." Mehmet Demirsoy was in a position to be late for work even if he wanted to, but the situation was different for Elif Yilmaz, and Demirsoy had a habit of bringing his young wife to work in the hospital with his own vehicle. The couple agreed that they hadn't forgotten anything when they left the house, and 5 minutes later they were inside the Audi A8. It was a bright day, and although it was early in the morning, it was clear that the weather would not be as cold as the previous 2 days. The 7-kilometer road from Besiktas to Sisli Training and Research Hospital, where Elif Yilmaz works, was enjoyable, except for Mehmet Demirsoy hurling a mouthful of profanity at a minibus that was swerving in traffic. The vehicle, which was heading towards Sisli via Barbaros Boulevard, stopped near the hospital a few minutes after turning into Halaskargatsi Street. The large and spacious main building of the hospital, which has a large complex of various buildings, is clearly visible from the inside of the vehicle. The exterior of the buildings was predominantly in shades of white and gray. There were large glass doors at the main entrance door, marked by numerous signs. Some of them had the name of the hospital written on them. Mehmet Demirsoy got out of the car and looked after his beautiful wife, who was walking briskly towards the entrance door. Influenced by the beautiful night he had had and the bright day he had begun, He thought that he was a grumpy old man whose worries were unfounded. Elif's friend, who wrote messages behind her back, was a mentally ill person who was jealous of her happiness. His mischievous and spoiled son was probably stuck on one side. What else could it be? This time, the businessman set out to go to his own place of work. He had more than 10 kilometers ahead of him to reach his office in Maslak, and even if the traffic was open, the road was unlikely to take less than half an hour in Istanbul conditions. It was often easiest to get from Tiem. For this he headed to Mecidiyeköy. From there it would go to Barbaros Boulevard and then reach Tiem. When he arrived at Mecidiyeköy, he noticed that his phone, which he had left on the next seat, started to ring. Leaning slightly to the right without taking his eyes off the road, he picked up the phone and looked at the screen. The number was unfamiliar. He had no habit of answering with unregistered numbers, especially when he is behind the wheel. He put the phone back in the right seat. He continued on his way, trying not to pay attention to the device that kept ringing. The phone finally went silent. But after allowing Mehmet Demirsoy to go only a few hundred meters, it started ringing again. It was the same number that called. This time, Mehmet Demirsoy answered the phone helplessly. "Who are you meeting?" happened to her. "Yes. My name is Mehmet Demirsoy. I am listening to you, Mr. Salim." "Mr. Mehmet, to you well? Unfortunately, I have to deliver bad news." Mehmet Demirsoy could hardly say, "I am listening to you." "Mr. Mehmet, unfortunately your son had a traffic accident." Mehmet Demirsoy's eyes seemed to darken. He felt his chest tighten and his hands tremble. He almost crashed into the vehicle in front of him. He could hardly control his car. "The situation. How's he?" "Mr. Mehmet, I think it would be better if you came here right away." 20 minutes later, Mehmet Demirsoy was in the hospital. Elif Yilmaz greeted him at the entrance. They rushed to the rehabilitation unit. Neurology specialist Dr. Mustafa Unsal tried to calm Mehmet Demirsoy as much as he could and gave information about Bariz's condition. He would then let him see his son for 2 minutes. According to Dr. Unsal, Bariz had a serious accident with his motorcycle on New Year's Eve morning, and a family returning home by chance noticed the situation and reported the situation to the ambulance and the police. Bariz had suffered a serious head injury, one of his ribs had cracked, slightly injuring his right lung tissue, and his right wrist had been cracked. Apart from that, he had minor scratches and cuts on various parts of his body. After the interventions, lung damage and head trauma were prevented from being life-threatening. Although Bari's condition was serious, his respiratory function and cognitive abilities would improve in a few months at most. However, there was another important problem. Immediately after the accident, Bari's engine caught fire and the young man lay unconscious on the ground with severe burns on his body. He had second and third degree burns on his face, almost all of his right arm and a significant portion of his left arm, chest and the foreground of both legs. The first interventions for burns were also made in a timely manner. In the long run, though, this was going to be an aesthetic problem. Dr. Mustafa Unsal said that although it is not his area of expertise, he expects that after a few weeks of rehabilitation, Bariz Demirsoy will have to undergo a series of plastic surgeries. It was obvious that a difficult period awaited Bariz Demirsoy, but if he was lucky enough, he would be able to regain his health in less than a year. Dr. Unsal allowed Mehmet Demirsoy, who had taken blood pressure medication and sedatives and had difficulty standing, into the intensive care unit for a minute. Bariz Demirsoy was lying tied to the bed under the faint hum of the respirator. There were hoses, cables and metals all over it, which Mehmet Demirsoy did not know exactly what they were for. Except for his eyes and mouth, his entire face and most of his body were bandaged. Mehmet Demirsoy, who could hardly stand, almost fainted when he saw his son in this state. Dr. Mustafa Unsal and Elif Yilmaz took him by the arm and took him out of the intensive care room and then out of the hospital building. Mehmet Demirsoy sat on one of the wooden benches in the garden. Elif Yilmaz too. "Do not be afraid, my one. Bariz will be healed. Everything will be the same as before," he said. Mehmet Demirsoy, who ran his hand over the wooden texture of the bench as if caressing his son's head, sobbed as if he was about to start crying. A tear rolled down his eye. But then he mastered himself. He tried to smile, turning to his wife who was sitting next to him and patting him on the shoulder. Dr. Unsal, who accompanied the couple by standing, said, "Mrs. Elif is telling the truth, Mr. Mehmet. Bariz will prevail." 2 months later, the troubled days were over, and the dark clouds that had descended on the Demirsoy family had dissipated. Bariz Demirsoy got over what happened to him quickly. Mehmet Demirsoy's concerns about his wife, Elif, were just the unwarranted suspicions of an old man. Mehmet Demirsoy tried to convince himself of this beautiful dream. He really tried to do that. He couldn't. For a pair of eyes looking from the outside, there was no reason not to believe that things were going well. After such a severe car accident and a series of surgeries, his son was almost completely recovered. So what was wrong? What was the source of the gnawing suspicion that Mehmet Demirsoy could not even admit to himself? Why did he still dream every night, if they could be called dreams, that his son had been killed? Even though she had seen Boris more often than ever in recent years, why couldn't he feel that he was reunited with his son? Was he going crazy? That morning they sat down to breakfast as a family. While spreading butter on his toast, Mehmet Demirsoy asked his wife, who was sitting across from him, "What is our program today?" "You know, today Boris's bandages will be removed, my dear," she said. "The appointment is at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So I took the day off until noon. We talked about going to the hospital with Boris. Besides, we will not prevent you from your work and power. We'll see you in the evening." Mehmet Demirsoy turned to Boris, who was sitting on the right side of the table relative to him. The young man didn't seem to be very interested in what was said at breakfast, or what was put in front of him to eat. Except for taking a sip of his coffee once in a while, he was completely focused on the phone in his hand. The bandages that were placed on Boris Demirsoy's face as a precaution after the third and last plastic surgery he had 2 weeks ago were to be removed today. The young man had completely gotten rid of the burn marks on his face. There was no permanent damage to his lung or leg. "Boris?" "Yes, Dad?" "What do you say? If you want, I can stop by at noon and drop you off at the hospital. Then I'll bring you home. We'll have a little bit of a man-to-man conversation." Boris Demirsoy said, "There is no need, thank you, Father. We will go with Elif," he said, taking a nap and burying his head in the phone in his hand again. Chapter 2. 4 months later. "Guys, off. Me. That's it, off." Mehmet Demirsoy slowed down and then stopped before paying attention to Ali Demirsoy and Ismail Chetin, who continued to run. He bent down and put his hands on his knees. He was breathing deeply. His burly brother, who was looking for an excuse to stop but tried to look so eager to run, paused and turned around. His older brother looked really exhausted. "Is that all? We've only just begun, old man." Mehmet Demirsoy continued to hold his left hand above his knee in a bent state, while slightly raising his right hand and extending his index finger to the meaning of, "Let me take a breath for a second, I will give you the necessary answer." After running a few meters, Ismail Chetin joined the group of those who used his friend who had stopped before him as an excuse to stop. "It's passed from us." "From us?" "Puff, passed." On the first day of June, there was great weather on the Boston beach early in the morning. 3 friends sat on a wooden bench overlooking the sea. From the bench where he sat, the islands and the historic peninsula could be seen. People walking and jogging were passing in front of them. There was a playground at the back. "Boris has recovered quickly," said Ismail Chetin, looking at the young girl who was rollerblading past him. "You too?" "Yes, but..." Ali Demirsoy, who was clearly not in the habit of doing sports from the makeshift stance of the tracksuit he was wearing, intervened without waiting for his brother to finish his speech. "Ours will start complaining again, Ismail. He is a little paranoid and a little melancholic. If only you knew what you told me. I warn you in advance, don't listen to what you have to say." Ismail Chetin didn't seem to have listened to Ali. "What did he tell?" he asked. Ali Demirsoy said, "Let him tell himself," pointing to Mehmet Demirsoy with his head. "I was going to tell you anyway," said the businessman. "If you hadn't cut," he continued. He told Ismail Chetin about the text message sent by İPUCU after their wedding anniversary dinner a few months ago and his suspicions about Elif Yilmaz. Then it was Boris Demirsoy's turn. Thankfully, Boris recovered sooner than we all anticipated. To an outside eye, it's almost intact. But, his behavior has changed a lot. I can hardly recognize him. It's hard to tell exactly. Of course, it is normal for him to have small outbursts of anger after such an accident, to become depressed, to have blurred memories and so on, but it's like there's something beyond that. It's like, take out the pot in your mouth, old friend. It's like it's not Boris. What does it mean? I don't know. Perhaps, as Ali said, I'm going crazy. But when you put together what happened before the accident and what happened afterward, it seems to me that there is something involved. In my opinion, Boris's recovery process and behavior after the accident are not similar to the natural processes that a person who has been in a traffic accident will experience after the accident. What I'm trying to say is like there's something else out there that I can't name, and the accident is being used by someone to camouflage that. Mehmet Demirsoy's story attracted Ismail Chetin's attention. He had known the man for many years and knew that he was not one to grumble about things out of nowhere. By whom? And what actions of Boris made you think so? Well, maybe Elif, maybe others. Or Elif and someone who collaborates with her. As for Boris, as you know, he is in pretty good physical shape. Considering what happened to him, maybe he's too good. But after the accident, he turned down all his friends who came to visit him and stopped seeing them. Is that all? Not really. There are a couple of other things that bother me. Except for the period of 1 or a month and a half immediately after the accident, Boris' cognitive functions are fine. In other words, he does not have any problems with his memory or handling his daily tasks. But there are some things that seem strange to me. Sometimes he looks at the things he is most familiar with as if he has seen them for the first time. He treats the people he knows best, even me, as if we were strangers. After what you've been through, don't you think that's normal? What does the doctor say about that? I did not discuss this issue with the doctor in private. In general, they mentioned that he may experience some temporary mental confusion due to the trauma he experienced. Perhaps, as you say, these are normal things, but it still seems to me that something is not falling into place. Are you trying to get the word out? Mehmet Demirsoy hesitated whether to say what was on his mind. He paused for a few seconds. Then he decided to move on. He needed to vent to someone he knew he could trust and get ideas from someone. As you know, Boris was very fond of his mother and could not recover for a long time after Pervin's death. When he found out that I was going to marry Elif, he reacted to this. We had argued with him about it a few times. Of course, they didn't fight with Elif or anything. But they were quite distant. Of course, there is nothing strange about all this. If it were me, I would act like it. But after the accident, there was an unexpected closeness between them. What kind of intimacy? After Boris was discharged, Elif often took leave from the hospital and started to spend her days at home with him. She cited the fact that she was a professional in patient care as the reason for this. What really surprised me was that Boris was also very happy with this. A couple of times I had the feeling that they were talking about something secret from me and that when they noticed me they were brushing it off. Ismail Chetin looked thoughtful. He didn't seem to know what to think. After a brief silence, he was able to say, "Is that all?" "I'm afraid no, my old friend. I wish it were so. Then I could convince myself that I was crazy. But last week, when I took Boris to the hospital for physical therapy, something unexpected happened. One of the nurses who had been treating Boris since the first day, I think her name was Eileen, came to me while I was waiting alone in the garden of the hospital. She was quite nervous and seemed to be in a hurry. This time, Ali Demirsoy, who had been quietly listening to his brother and his lawyer friend talk for 15 minutes, intervened. "You didn't tell me about that either, old man. What does she want from you?" "She told me that she had things to tell me about Boris, but he couldn't do it there, and she asked me for contact information. So I gave her my backup email address, which I rarely use. She said she would write to me in the evening of the same day at the latest." Ismail Chetin asked, "Did she write it?" "No. She hasn't written it even though it's been a week." İPUCU took the first step into the world of the living by trying to get rid of the eternal darkness and open her eyes. On her first attempt, daylight was excruciatingly painful. She wanted to return to the comfort of darkness and absence. She didn't. She tried to open her eyes again. The light that pricked her eyes with 1,000 needles was painful this time too, but not as much as on her first try. And the darkness was still comfortable. But not as much as before. After an indefinite period of time after she managed to keep her eyes open, the intertwined sights and sounds began to make sense. She was in a white room. She was lying in a strange bed. Someone had something tied all over his body. Then she seemed to remember who she was and what had happened to her. She noticed that a silhouette had entered the room she was in and was saying something that she didn't initially grasp what it meant. The image and the speech then made sense. A nurse said, "I think she's coming to her senses." Immediately after, she again surrendered himself into the arms of darkness. That was enough for today. Monday was as busy as ever for Mehmet Demirsoy. In addition to routine tasks such as scheduling daily and weekly shipments and hosting customers, he also had to deal with updating some licenses that had expired for the day, as well as some unpleasant layoffs. A little past 7 o'clock in the afternoon, it was time to review the daily emails. Demirsoy usually did this twice a day, in the morning and in the evening. Deleted spam. And the CVs sent for job applications, the posts of some unruly people asking for donations, and finally the complaints of spoiled customers. After taking a brief look at the emails about overdue payments and advertisements, he left the detailed review until the next day. He had finally completed another day of work. Just as he was about to turn off his computer and get up, something came to his mind. He clicked on the backup email account, which he no longer used much. He shuddered when he came across the email he didn't expect to see. After a few seconds of hesitation, he opened the message. Hello, Mr. Mehmet. My name is Eileen Sargent. I regret to say that you are in a great deception. I'll tell you the whole truth. I believe you have a right to know the facts. I feel responsible to you for some personal reasons. I know you have no reason to trust me, but I'm sure your instincts are already telling you that something is wrong. My request to you is that before you come back to the hospital, examine Baris's hands. Then I will tell you all that happened. Goodbye. Mehmet Demirsoy felt nauseous, dizzy, and his eyes darkened. What was going on? Who was this Eileen Sargent? What was hidden behind what happened to Baris? Barely getting up from the table where he was sitting, he tried to prepare himself for the most brutal answers he could get. At least he would soon find out everything. At dinner that evening, he did exactly what she wrote. He scrutinized his 23-year-old son from head to toe, trying to act natural. Especially his hands. There was only one explanation for what he realized. The problem was that it was not possible for that one explanation to be true. I know, Yusuf, it's important, but I won't be able to take care of it today. Yes, that's right. Cancel them all. I'm sure. It doesn't matter, I'm responsible. Okay. I have to turn it off. See you soon. Mehmet Demirsoy hung up. As he entered the outpatient clinic door of the hospital, he was careful not to catch a leaf or a close friend. It had been 2 days since he received an email from Eileen Sargent. He knew that Elif was working that day, but the issue was too important to wait for a day when his wife had a day off. Of the 2 female staff members sitting next to each other at the front desk, he approached the surprisingly thin one and asked, "Well, I want to talk to Eileen Sargent. She works here as a nurse. She knew I was going to stop by." The extremely weak officer stared at Demirsoy's face for a few seconds as if he had seen an alien. Then, without saying anything to the man, he dialed a number from the device in front of him. "Is Eileen Sargent in the hospital now?" a gentleman asks. "No. Yes. He said that Ms. Eileen had heard about it." "Is that so? Are you sure?" "Okay. That's how I pass it on." After the woman in charge hung up the phone, she turned to Demirsoy, who was impatient to get an answer, and said, "Ms. Eileen changed her place of duty on Tuesday this week, that is, yesterday, sir." "What does that mean?" "She started working at another hospital." "I get it. But it's so weird, so." "Are you sure?" "Yes, sir." "What hospital does she work in?" "I can't tell you that. But if you want, you can make an appointment to ask the head doctor." "I beg your permission, sir, there are people waiting in line." Mehmet Demirsoy froze. He couldn't think clearly. He went out into the garden of the hospital to get some air and decide what to do. Remembering that Elif was there, he made his way through the building to a point where he hoped it would not be easily noticed. He couldn't make sense of what was happening. He could have cut corners and convinced himself that these were all tricks his mind was playing on him. After all, in some cases it was easier and more comfortable to believe that one was at fault than to admit that one was surrounded by scoundrels. He might have chosen to think that he had a beautiful young wife, whom he had doubted for no reason, and that his son had been in an unfortunate car accident a few months earlier, but had escaped cheaply, and was now almost fully recovered. I can attribute the strange messages from 2 different women to the fact that the women are crazy. But that wasn't the truth. Whatever the truth was, the road to it was through Eileen Sargent, and the young woman who worked in this hospital until yesterday was changing her place of duty at the most critical time. This relocation story didn't sound convincing at all. It could not be a coincidence that the woman disappeared so suddenly. There was more to this than meets the eye. Mehmet Demirsoy made up his mind. He was going to go through it no matter what. Eileen had to find out where Sargent was. If he met Elif inside, he would make up an excuse. He started walking towards the entrance of the hospital again. As he was about to enter, he stopped suddenly. He turned around and began to walk away from the hospital with quick steps. He didn't have to go in to talk to the head doctor. The plastic surgeon who performed plastic surgery on Baris was also the chief physician of the hospital and could call the man on the phone and talk to him. On his way out of the hospital, a pretty girl in her 20s, wearing a light green raincoat, somehow caught Demirsoy's attention. He had just seen her entering the hospital, and he was almost certain that he had seen her somewhere before. When the young girl realized that she had been noticed, she averted her gaze from Mehmet Demirsoy and turned to the screen of her phone, which she was holding in her hand. It was approaching noon when Dr. Semi Karakok passed through the dim corridor and reached the room where Gulsen Savink was sleeping. After tapping lightly on the door, Karakok rushed in without waiting for someone to answer. Gulsen Savink was a middle-aged and chubby woman. The day before, she had undergone reconstruction surgery to get rid of the scar she had carried on her face for years. The surgery went smoothly. Sister Melahat Savink was accompanying her sibling. Semi Karakok completely ignored the woman. "Good morning, Ms. Gulson, how are we today?" Gulson Savink said from where she was lying. "Thanks to you, I feel much better than I already do, doctor." She hissed as she spoke because of the swelling on her face. Semi Karakok leaned slightly and looked closely at the woman's face. Then he quickly scribbled something in the file he was holding. Meanwhile, the woman was watching the doctor with curiosity and concern. Semi Karakok said, "There is no problem, Ms. Gulson. The trajectory is good. We will keep you here for another day." Melahat Savink and Gulson Savink said, "Thank you very much, doctor," at the same time, like a children's choir. Association Professor Dr. Semi Karakok returned to his room after the patient checks. That day he felt the need to drink coffee more than ever. He had performed Gulson Savink's surgery as soon as he returned from the Congress at the Charite Berlin University Hospital in Germany, and he felt quite exhausted. The files piling up on his desk undermined the comforting effect of the large, bright room. He looked at his watch. 12:08. He took a deep breath. He could go out to dinner. He didn't have surgery today. He could take care of the rest of the paperwork in the afternoon. As he was about to tell his secretary that he was going to take a break, his phone rang. He knew who the number that appeared on the screen belonged to. He picked up the phone. "Hello, Mr. Semi, my name is Mehmet Demirsoy, the father of Baris. I'm sorry to bother. I was going to ask you something very short if you were available." "Please, Mr. Mehmet, I am listening to you." We had contacted Nurse Eileen Sargent, one of the hospital staff, for a face-to-face meeting for a personal matter. I was in the hospital this morning for this reason, but without consulting them, they told me that Ms. Eileen had changed her place of duty the day before and transferred to another institution. When I asked how I could contact her, they directed me to you. I wonder if you can give me the new assignment location or phone number. There was no answer from the other side of the phone for a few seconds. Then Semi Karakok said in a mechanical tone, "I will get back to you at the first place in the afternoon." It was 4 o'clock in the morning when the black pickup truck stopped grunting near the large pine he had set his eye on. It was freezing and it was pitch black. "Is this place good? What difference does it make? Everywhere is the same. Let's get this done and get out of here as soon as possible." The two men got out of the vehicle. Together, they shouldered the burden behind the vehicle, carried it to the foot of the tree and dropped it. Later, someone went to the vehicle 10 meters away and brought the shovels with which they were going to dig in the ground. He turned around and threw one of the oars at his friend. His friend caught the paddle in midair. Before he started digging, he probed the soil around the tree with his foot, trying to find the softest place. "Well, that's where we start." "Okay." They hurriedly began to dig. Less than a minute later, they both stopped at the same time. Something was wrong. A vehicle was approaching them from the northwest side of the Goat Road where they had parked their vehicle. Unlike them, the vehicle's headlights were on with nothing to hide. The two friends gestured to each other with their hands to be quiet. They waited for the oncoming vehicle to pass by without noticing anything. That didn't happen. The vehicle, for what damn reason it had come to such a place at this hour, stopped 20 or 30 yards away from them. He didn't turn off his headlights. "What are we going to do?" "I don't know. I think let's wait a little longer. Maybe he'll go." "I think so. It's going to go for sure." The unidentified vehicle continued to stop in front of the two friends with their headlights on for a period of time that they could not predict how long it was due to the tension. Then he moved again. Two friends standing like statues at the pine tree with shovels in their hands breathed a sigh of relief. But they waited until the vehicle was well away before continuing to dig. They waited in vain. The vehicle traveled no more than 50 meters before coming to a stop again. When Association Professor Dr. Semi Karakok returned to Mehmet Demirsoy, it was close to 5 in the afternoon. "Sorry for waiting, Mr. Mehmet. It was a busy day. Let me explain it to you like this. I have been abroad for the past week due to congresses. While I was away, my secretary took care of the administrative affairs. After you called, I remembered that my secretary called me on my way to the airport on the day I was going to return from Germany to confirm Ms. Eileen's change of duty. I told him to approve it for me. I forgot about it because there was nothing to dwell on. We do not have Ms. Eileen's personal contact information, but I'll give you the contact details for the new assignment and they'll help you from there." "Thank you very much, Mr. Doctor," Mehmet Demirsoy said, even though he did not find the man's account convincing. 2 minutes later, when Mehmet Demirsoy read the message sent by Semi Karakok, his astonishment increased even more. The hospital where Eileen Sargent started working was not in Istanbul, but in Tekirdağ. Why did he stop again? How do I know? Maybe he noticed our van. Damn it. Someone gets out of the car. I see you, shut up. In the middle of pitch darkness, the light emanating from the headlights of the unidentified vehicle illuminated the place. Still, the two friends couldn't make out exactly what the man looked like as he got out of the car, because the flashlight in the man's hand was taking his eyes off. There was only one thing they agreed on. The man had seen them and was fearlessly approaching them. Damn it, let's get out of here. Shall we go? Are we going to leave him here? Stay if you want. I'm leaving. The two friends ran and jumped into the parked pickup truck. In a sudden maneuver on the goat path in the forest, they made a U-turn and sped away in the opposite direction. They would lie to their bosses about what they had to leave behind. As soon as the old man got out of his vehicle, he knew what was going on. He coolly watched the two shadows running away. He knew very well how cowardly such people were, even if they did not look like it from the outside. As soon as he heard the truck's engine running, he quickened his steps. A minute later he was next to the corpse lying on the ground. He shone his flashlight on the face of the body lying motionless. He was a young man in his 20s. When he pressed two fingers against the young man's jugular vein to make sure before deciding what to do, he was startled by something he had never expected. I'm making you wait a second. Please don't leave the line. Thank you, I'm waiting. Yes, as you said, Eileen Sargent transferred to our institution 2 days ago. I will personally forward your message and phone number to him. There is a lot of work hours, but she will get back to you at the end of the shift. Although Mehmet Demirsoy did not find the information provided by Semih Karakok convincing, he phoned the institution where the desperate Eileen Sargent supposedly started working. On the other side of the line was a woman who spoke by swallowing half the words. He seemed hopeful at the woman's kind and caring demeanor. He hung up the phone by saying, "Thank you very much, good work." For now there was nothing to do but wait. If he had the chance, Eileen Sargent would return. Thinking back on it, even if what happened was extremely strange, there was no reason to be skeptical about at least this part of the business. It would be a bit of an exaggeration to think that the head doctor of the hospital was lying and telling a made-up story. After all, Semih Bey's fabrication of such a tale would only make sense if it was a part of whatever the revolving cabinet was, which was officially absurd. No more. Let me be involved in a scandal involving the head doctor, other hospital staff, and even health institutions outside the city that I have not even heard of, and they killed Eileen Sargent to silence her. Eileen's change of duty could very well have been coincidental, and she might have even forgotten what she was going to say in that intensity. Mehmet Demirsoy smiled to himself. Mehmet Demirsoy left his office to return home 2 hours later. He took an elevator down to the large floor parking lot on the floor of the business center. He greeted the old attendant, who was sitting sluggishly. As he made his way to the section dedicated only to the vehicles of prestigious clients, he sighed that the elderly parking attendant contrasted with the modern car park in appearance. In doing so, he thought that his own age was not so advanced. He got into his car, which was parked in the area full of security cameras. He started his vehicle. Circling widely, he reached the upper floor, and from there he headed for the exit. When he left the parking lot and reached the street, he noticed that the beautiful girl in the green raincoat he had seen in the garden of the hospital at noon that day was standing there. He continued on his way home. The girl in green watched the Audi pass by. After the luxury vehicle drove far enough, she took her phone out of his pocket. She found the corresponding number. She wrote, "He made his first attempt at noon today. He's been aware of things for a while. I don't know how much, but it doesn't seem to let go of the work." The answer was not delayed. "Good. Thanks for your help. Try not to attract attention." Mehmet Demirsoy, who was at the head of his vehicle, looked at his watch. It was approaching 8 o'clock in the evening. Although it was the second week of May, the weather was cool and getting dark. Demirsoy was tired and confused. Who was the girl in green that he had just seen at the exit of the parking lot in the hospital today? Where had he seen her before? Why was he so obsessed? During the day, the partial optimism Eileen Sargent felt when she reached her new workplace was replaced by dark thoughts once again when he saw the girl in green again. Eileen Sargent hadn't called yet. The expression used by the woman in the email she sent rang in Demirsoy's mind once again. Look at the hands of Baris. Eileen Sargent was a slap in the face of the fact that Mehmet Demirsoy had been aware of it for a while, but had avoided admitting it to himself by making various excuses. The young man who was hospitalized 4 months ago was not Baris Demirsoy, and the only person who could tell him the truth about this matter was suddenly changing her workplace 2 days after the message he sent, and by moving to another city. The woman pointed to Baris's hands because no plastic surgery could give a person the hands of another person. And the teenager who underwent surgery on his face under the pretext that he was burned in the accident was not him, although he looked a lot like his son. Eileen Sargent had asked Mehmet Demirsoy to come to the meeting aware of this basic fact in order to ensure that what she would tell later was taken seriously. Then, suddenly realizing that the red light was on, he turned to earth. He braked hard and ripped off from crashing into the white Ford Focus in front of him. Judging by the klaxons he sounded and the profanity he ate, the vehicle behind him also avoided hitting him at the last moment. Before causing a chain crash, he pulled into a gas station 200 yards from the traffic lights to decide what to do. He parked his vehicle in the empty space between the gas tanks and the car wash. He took a deep breath. He went into the toilet of the gas station and washed his face. He looked at his image in the mirror. He looked as if he was older than ever. He tried to get his head together. He walked into the small cafeteria just to the right of the convenience store portion of the gas station. He bought himself black coffee in a cardboard cup. As he sipped his coffee, he asked himself the question he was most afraid to face. Is my son alive? He felt like he was struggling to breathe as he thought about it. As a man with life experience, he knew that the only way to get results even in the most difficult situations was to get rid of emotions and act rationally. That's why he tried to systematize the questions in his mind. The key to finding out what happened to his son, to save him if he was still alive and at risk of death, was Eileen Sargent. On the other hand, if Semi Karakok was also involved, he could have told Elif that he went to the hospital today and that he suspected what happened. The other big question is, who was the teenager he thought was his son for 4 months? What was his connection with Elif? Elif Yilmaz, Dr. Semi Karakok and whoever else is involved in this, what would be their next move when they got what they wanted? Was his own life in danger? And who was the young girl in the green raincoat? Did she really have anything to do with this? These were the questions he was able to muster in his head. So what could be done to solve it? Should he have gone to the police? What would he say if he left? I suspect that my second wife somehow caused my son to get into a car accident. I don't have a concrete reason for this, but I don't trust her. The person who was said to be my son after the accident is not really my son, but someone who has been compared to him through plastic surgery. I don't know what happened to my real son. He may have been murdered, but there is no body. Eileen Sargent, a nurse who said she would tell me what happened, no longer lives in Istanbul. If he tried to tell such a story to the police, they would laugh it off at best. Maybe they would have gone further and done a psychiatric examination, diagnosed with schizophrenia or something. To make matters worse, Elif would find out about the situation and act accordingly. At this stage, telling the police about the situation was the most unreasonable thing to do. It took 2 phone calls before I could do the only thing that made sense. For the first one, he touched the necessary place on the screen. Hello, Mehmet? Where are you, my dear? Are you on your way? Hello, dear. I've got to be at work tonight. I can't come home or I'll be too late. What's the problem? Is it a big deal? I don't know the details yet, my dear. There was a mishap on one of our cargo ships. A small explosion occurred on the ship carrying anchor to the United Arab Emirates. If I'm too late, I'll stay in a hotel and go to work tomorrow. How is Boris? Is he at home? Yes, he's with me. He was starting to wonder about you too. Take care of yourself. I hope it's nothing too serious. Let me know when you're done. Don't worry, dear. I kiss you. Mehmet Demirsoy closed it up, hoping that the story he had invented would be convincing enough. It was time for the second phone call. This time he was going to call a number that was not registered in his contacts. He pulled his wallet out of his pocket. He checked to see if it had the necessary card in it. Didn't. Then he went online on his phone. He typed it into the search engine. Movenpick Hotel, Istanbul. He dialed the hotel's phone number. The receptionist woman, in her thin, slightly hoarse voice, rolled and swallowing words and asked, Movenpick Hotel, how can I help? Mehmet Demirtas told the woman that he wanted to book a single room for the night and wondered if they had put a round-the-words requirement in the application conditions when hiring people to answer corporate phones. After booking a place, it was time to do the only sensible thing he could think of, to explain the situation to Ismail Chetin. Finding his friend's number, he tapped on it. Hi Mehmet, how are you? From the tone of the experienced lawyer's voice, it was clear that he sensed that something was wrong. Or Mehmet Demirsoy was extremely skeptical. Hello Ismail. Can we meet you in person tonight? What's going on, buddy? Sound worried? There are some serious setbacks. I want to tell you without wasting time, but not over the phone. If possible, of course. Of course, old man. Where do we meet? I booked a stay at the Movenpick Hotel tonight. Can you come there? Ismail Chetin looked at his watch. I'm there in an hour. Maybe it will take a little longer. Agreed. See you there. Thank you. Immediately after Elif Yilmaz hung up the phone, she called Dr. Semih Karakok. "Hi. You were right to be suspicious. He didn't come home tonight. He said he was going to stay in the hotel with an excuse that even the kids wouldn't believe." "I understand. Fortunately, we realized Eileen's intentions at the last moment. Do not be afraid. Even if you suspect that something is wrong, he can't figure out what's going on." "Are you sure?" "Of course." "Then, when he returns home, appear to believe what he says about work. Act naturally. Are we not going to do anything?" "Not for now." By the time Mehmet Demirsoy and Ismail Chetin met in the scenic lobby of the Movenpick Hotel, it had been about an hour and a half since their phone call. Ismail Chetin took a sip of low-sugar Turkish coffee. Looking a little at his friend's face and a little at the view outside through the large window to his right, he said, "I expected things to get serious the day we went for a run on the beach. Maybe it's not the time, but from the very beginning I thought it was wrong to marry Elif. What has happened in the last few days that you have become this way?" Mehmet Demirsoy told his old friend about the message he received from Eileen Sargent and his meeting with Semih Karakok. He spoke of the young girl he suspected of following him. He shared his suspicions that the young man who underwent surgery may not be Baris. "It's a really difficult situation. Eileen Sargent didn't call back, did she?" "Nope." "Who do you think is the woman? What does she have to do with this?" "I have no idea." "And did you ever communicate with the girl who warned you about Elif? What was his name?" "İPUCU Sahin. I called several times but couldn't reach her. I think she blocked me." "I see. Maybe you should try to reach her again. What she will say may be important." On the other hand, Eileen Sargent along with Elif and Dr. Semih may have been involved in the beginning, but later a difference of opinion may have arisen between them. If they eliminated her, they must have noticed that she was trying to contact you. Maybe they've even read the message she wrote to you. "You're right," Mehmet Demirsoy replied as he absent-mindedly turned the empty coffee cup in front of him in circles with his hand. It was obvious that his world had come crashing down on him. There was silence for a while. Hidden in the silence was a question that Ismail Chetin did not dare to ask openly because of his friend's state of mind. "I'm really sorry for what you've been through, my friend, but for what exactly reason did you call me here at this time of night?" Realizing the situation, Mehmet Demirsoy continued. "I have to do something. I think that going to the police will not yield results. There is nothing to substantiate my claims. You are familiar with the legal regulations. I called you because I had no one else to trust. I remember you once telling me about a friend of yours. From someone extraordinary who illuminates such situations. Do you think he can help me?" Instead of answering his friend's question, the veteran lawyer looked outside for a long time. Kemal Gursoy took a square pink box out of the refrigerator and placed it on the elegant wooden table. He carefully opened the box. He placed a candle on top of the cake for one person. He blew out the candle. "Happy 64th birthday. Happy birthday to me." He took a piece of the pie. He stared absent-mindedly at the black and white photograph on the table and ate the morsel he put in his mouth. He put the rest of the cake in the fridge. He tried to remember how many birthdays he had celebrated alone. He couldn't be sure. 12 years had passed since the incident. "It's been 10 years since he quit my job and settled in this house in Beykoz. Since then he has been living alone." But he didn't remember if anyone had ever celebrated his birthday since. That didn't matter. He had decided to go fishing for the day. He looked at his watch. It was close to noon. He didn't mind having spent some of the ideal time. Then he looked out of one of the large windows in the hall. There seemed to be nothing in the sky to stop him from fishing. As he was getting ready to take his fishing gear with him that he had prepared the night before, he noticed that Magnus started barking as if they were going to take his life. Magnus kept barking like crazy. The metallic noises in between meant that it was straining the chain to which it was attached. This was absolutely not normal. Kemal Gursoy walked to the bottom of the stairs leading to the upper floor of his house. He unlocked the cream-colored compartment here. He quietly removed his pistol, which he had hidden. He checked to see if it was full. It was full. Magnus' barking continued unabated. But his voice was starting to sound more high-pitched and cracked. Every once in a while the animal felt like it was going to drown. Kemal Gursoy, who picked up his pistol, which he had not used for a long time, felt a shudder. He didn't know what he was up against. He had faced similar situations in his youth. But his years as a young man were long gone. Paying attention to his breathing, he made his way to the door of his house, which opened into the garden. Whoever was outside paid attention so he could hear the sound he was making, but he couldn't hear anything but the noise made by the damned Magnus who kept barking. He tried to prepare himself for various scenarios. Then he was startled by the sound he heard suddenly. Astros. Ismail Chetin tried to knock on the door of his friend, whom he had not seen for a long time. Apparently the bell was defective. He then knocked on the door, banging as hard as possible to make sure he could be heard. While this strange dog barked like crazy, his friend might not hear the knock at the door. "Kamal? I'm Ismail, are you inside?" Maybe the idea of paying a surprise birthday visit to a 64-year-old man wasn't a good one. When Kamal Gursoy realized that it was one of his old friends, lawyer Ismail Chetin, who had come to visit him, he looked at the pistol he was holding in his hand and silently cursed first Magnus and then himself. He quickly hid the pistol away in one corner that he hoped Ismail Chetin would not see, then did not give it to the spoiler and opened the door. "Who do I see?" "Welcome, Ismail, what a nice surprise," he said, gesturing with his hand to his friend to come in. "Hey Kamal. You haven't been around for a long time. I wondered if you were dead or left, I thought I'd check it out," Ismail Chetin said as he walked in. And he handed the gift package in his hand to his friend. "So you haven't forgotten." Ismail Chetin winked in the sense of, "I have not forgotten." "Please excuse Magnus," Kamal Gursoy continued as he unwrapped the gift in his hand. "We don't have a lot of visitors, people aren't used to it. He's a bit of a weird dog." "It's no problem," Ismail Chetin said as he glanced at the original decoration of his friend's house and added, "I like dogs," even though he didn't actually like them. The furnishings were ordinary and plain. On the lower floor of the duplex house, which could be called spacious, there were armchairs, tables, chairs and coffee tables of the smallest possible quantity, of medium quality and a little old but pleasing to the eye. There were no carpets or rugs on the floor. The fireplace at one end of the hall, which had obviously never been used, was a little neglected. Attached to the fireplace were some photographs and some medals and trophies that Kamal Gursoy once bought from somewhere. The scarcity of household items left a large and spacious space in the living room. On the other hand, a remarkably large library stretched across the right wall of the hall. Despite this, Kamal Gursoy's books did not seem to fit on the bookshelf. Certain parts of the hall were filled with books placed haphazardly. A large map hung on one of the walls. Apparently, Kamal Gursoy had made some drawings on the map. On a large coffee table was a stylish chess set, a chess clock, and a chess book that had been turned upside down and left open. There was a medium-sized aquarium in the part where the open kitchen integrated with the living room was passed. The glass aquarium, 60 centimeters wide and 30 centimeters high, was placed on a wooden stand. The aquarium's lighting was provided by a small fluorescent lamp placed at the bottom of the metal lid, which prevented evaporation and fish from splashing out. Inside the aquarium there were tropical fish, the size of which ranged from 2 centimeters to 10 centimeters. A natural and aesthetic environment was created with live plants and decorative caves. Ismail Chetin likened the gaze of one of the fish, whose species he did not know, to his mother-in-law who died years ago. In Gursoy's house, there was also a faint musty smell that was typical of the ground floors of old houses near the sea. When Kamal Gursoy opened the package brought by his old friend, he saw that a book had come out of it. The book was written by Grandmaster David Bronstein and included game analysis of the Zurich 1953 International Chess Tournament. Kamal Gursoy, who had already bought and reviewed this quality book, which was famous for a certain segment, pretended to be happy. "Thank you, my friend. I had been wanting to buy and review this book for a long time, but it was never the time. What shall I offer you? I drink a coffee with little sugar. Do we go out into the garden or drink here?" "It's good here," Ismail Chetin said, thinking of Magnus, who kept barking from time to time. "Your house is very nice." 2 minutes later, the two friends were sitting opposite each other, drinking their coffee and chatting. "Jokes aside, you haven't been seen for a long time, Kamal. From time to time you would stop by our tavern or something. Are you in good health?" "I'm fine, don't worry. You know, I went through a difficult period but I got through it. I don't go out much, but that's because I prefer it that way. It's not that it's a problem." "What do you do? When is retirement?" "It's the usual stuff. You already know how annoying our work is and how slow it is. It's become more and more unbearable in recent years, and luckily I'm retiring in a few months." Kamal Gursoy took a sip of his coffee. Then, looking into his friend's eyes with a keen gaze, he said, "Very well. Now, if you don't mind, let's get to the main reason for visiting. Couldn't it be that I just wanted to celebrate an old friend's birthday?" Instead of answering, Kamal Gursoy rolled his eyes. Ismail Chetin decided to remove the broad beans from his mouth. "All right, man. To be honest, I've got you covered. More precisely, I came at the request of a dear friend. The topic has nothing to do with me, but I wanted to know what you think before I introduce you in person. My friend's name is Mehmet Demirsoy. About our age, he is a good person and a successful businessman. A few years ago he lost his first wife, Pervin, to cancer. 2 years after losing his wife, he married a nurse named Elif Yilmaz. Elif is in her 40s and she is a very attractive woman. At this point, the lawyer, who saw Kemal Gürsoy grinning meaningfully, paused for a second or two and then continued from where he left off. No one, including Mehmet himself, was at ease because of this lightning-fast marriage. But for the next 2 years, their marriage continued without any visible problems. Mehmet has a son in his 20s named Baris. He is a handsome and sociable young man. He's a good student. Or rather, he was. Baris had recently become a little depressed and scattered, first with the loss of his mother, then with his father's strange marriage. He graduated from university, but instead of taking responsibility, he devoted himself to nightlife. The incident I'm about to describe is exactly about Baris. 5 months ago, on New Year's Eve, Baris went out to have fun with his friends. But he didn't return home the next day. He didn't call his father on the phone either. Although Mehmet worried, he did not pay much attention to it at first, as his son has always been acting like this lately. When a few days passed and he did not hear from his son again, Mehmet's worries began to increase. That's when Mehmet received the bad news from a phone call from the hospital. Baris had an accident with his motorcycle on his way home on New Year's Eve and was seriously injured. Kemal Gürsoy, who had been listening to his friend with curiosity and attention until that moment, interrupted Ismail Chetin and intervened. You said the accident happened on New Year's Eve. It is certain that the child was taken to the hospital no more than a few hours after the accident. But according to him, when they called Mehmet Demirsoy from the hospital, a few days had passed since the accident. Did I understand correctly? Yes. Has Demirsoy explained to you why? I think they had a hard time identifying Baris after the accident. Baris suffered severe burns on his face and various parts of his body due to the motorcycle catching fire. Maybe his wallet and ID were burned too. And how did they identify him afterwards? According to Mehmet, they did this by investigating who had the license plate number of the motorcycle registered to it. Did the police or the doctor tell Mehmet Demirsoy about this? Well, actually I'm not sure. Mehmet did not dwell on this part of the work. He didn't tell me anything about seeing the police, but I don't know. I see. And what happened to the motorcycle after the accident? I don't know about that either. Okay. Sorry to interrupt, please continue. You're telling a pretty interesting story. As I said, Baris had an unfortunate accident and apart from the burns I just mentioned, he had a head injury, fractures in his leg and a lung injury. Over the next 4 months, he underwent 2 or 3 plastic surgeries for burns on his face. The injury to his leg has fully healed and the problem in his lungs has recovered to the extent that it will not hinder his life. As you can see, he got away cheap. Of course, he continues to go to the hospital on certain days. It's a sad event. But you still haven't gotten to the part of it that's about me. After 2 or 3 months had passed since the accident and Baris had begun to recover, Mehmet's psychology had begun to deteriorate more than better. For reasons he could not name exactly, he began to think that his real son had disappeared after the night of the accident. Perhaps he had been murdered, and that the young man in the hospital was not Baris, but that he had been made to look like his son with plastic operations on the pretext of burns, and that his wife Elif was involved. What do you think about that? Although I didn't find Elif trustworthy, Mehmet's concerns didn't seem convincing to me at first. I thought that maybe his mental health was starting to deteriorate because of the difficulties he was experiencing. Then he mentioned some things that would convince me considerably. First of all, the hospital where Baris was taken after the accident was the institution where Elif worked. Of course, this may be a coincidence, but I think it is still a remarkable detail. According to Mehmet, a few weeks before New Year's Eve, after a dinner with Elif on their wedding anniversary, an old friend of Elif's from university sent a message to Mehmet warning him that he was in danger and warning him against her. A few days earlier, Mehmet had received a similar warning message, this time from another woman, a nurse named Aylin Sargin. The woman wrote that she wanted to talk to Mehmet face to face and that she would tell him everything. But all of a sudden she disappeared. When Mehmet could not get clear information from the hospital staff about what happened to the nurse, he called the man to talk to the head doctor of the hospital. The man's name is Semih Karakok. Coincidentally, he is also a plastic surgeon and the person who performs Baris' plastic surgeries. Dr. Semih told Mehmet that Aylin Sargin had changed her place of duty 2 days ago and had started working in a hospital outside the city. Magnus started barking again as if to explain that Dr. Semih Karakok was lying. Then he fell silent. Couldn't your friend reach Aylin Sargin? Semih Karakok gave Mehmet the phone number of the hospital where the woman started working. When Mehmet phoned here, he said that the officer was kindly interested in him. The woman said that she would inform Eileen Sargent and that Eileen Sargent would return after the end of the shift. Of course, that didn't happen. Exactly. Kemal Gürsoy looked thoughtful. What do you think? I think your friend is right. Do you think Eileen Sargent and Boris Demirsoy are alive? Kemal Gürsoy responded to the question with a question. When can I meet Mehmet Demirsoy at the earliest? I think tomorrow. I'll let him know tonight. Good.